Welcome to Glow and Tell, a podcast about all things beauty, wellness, and business, sponsored by Artemis, the brand empowering the unsung heroes of beauty and wellness. All right, listeners, welcome back to Glow and Tell. I am so excited to be here today with Simon Mansell, who is our first guest speaker on the podcast, also has been my personal and professional mentor for the past almost 7 years now, I think. So we are super excited to have him on. He is the founder of our sponsor Artemis, but also the CEO of Fiber Skincare. So Simon, I'll let you just introduce yourself and your background, a little bit more about your experience and why our listeners should be interested in what you have to say.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. So I was going to do a quick introduction, I suppose, into a short version of my, story, career-wise. So I left home. Well, what actually happened was I borrowed my parents' car. When I say borrowed, I hadn't asked them to borrow it when I was 17, while they were on vacation, or holiday, as we call it in England, and crashed it twice in one day. The second time being quite a bad accident where the car was effectively written off. So then they got back from their holiday and were obviously not best pleased with this situation and kicked me out of the house. So I went to live at my friend's house and I didn't have any money. So I'd been there like 2 days and I got a job cleaning, well, 2 jobs. One was cleaning a Boots the Chemist, which is like equivalent of like CVS or Walgreens in America. So that job was at 5 a.m. Then I would come back home and sleep for an hour or two, and then I would go and clean a pub for another 2 hours. So that was kind of the start of my illustrious career, which is my own fault, but that's what happened. And so I was making £95 a week, and I eventually moved into, after sort of a week or so at my friend's house, I moved into another apartment. And my rent was £65. So I had £30 a week to spend on everything. And I was getting a little bit of help from my grandma. So I wasn't like completely destitute, but I don't really remember being like unhappy or anything during that time. I remember like having a treat. My treat was like a Snickers bar on a Friday, which I look forward to the same as I would look forward to a treat now. So I don't remember being particularly unhappy or it being like a real like rags to riches type story, but that is what happened to me. Then I went for a lot of job interviews and I think probably 10, and I got turned down for every single job because, I was 17, didn't know anything. And but I got accepted for one job, which was a sales job. And it was at a local company sort of outside of London in England, and went there. And I suppose I didn't realize it then, but looking back now, the first day I got on the phones, there's a scene in Wolf of Wall Street where he's on the phone in this like small dingy office and everyone sort of stops what they're doing and looks at him because, he's just way better than them. They're in this local, not very nice place and he's like a good salesperson. And so it was a bit like that. It was like I was naturally just lucky to be naturally talented at sales. Never done any sales or communication or anything like that before. It was just complete luck. So that was definitely a very lucky. And I was successful in that job, although, fairly badly behaved. But they sort of didn't know what to do with me because I was like the talented, badly behaved guy. I was 17 years old, so, you can sort of understand it. So then I was in different sales jobs, about 3 different sales jobs for 5 years. And in my last sales job, generally I was like one of the top performers, like number 1, number 2, number 3 in the company, just because I was talented and I did work hard. In my last job, I was making the company not a lot of money at the time, probably 25,000 a month, something like that. But it was really a product some advertising I was selling that I thought I could easily just sell this for myself. And then instead of making 5,000 a month, I'd be making 25,000 a month because that's what I'm making for them. So why not do it myself? So I went to my boss and said I wanted to start my own company. And so I wanted to go commission only at this particular job, which meant that I wouldn't get any basic salary anymore. My basic salary at the time was £40,000, which was a very good basic salary because by that point I was 22. So he sort of did the math and he said, okay, well, we can afford to pay you 25% of what you bring in. because like he thought I was working hard. But really, I wasn't really working that hard. So then the next month, I generated £100,000 in sales instead of my normal 25,000. And then he had to pay me £25,000 in commission, which he wasn't actually allowed to sign checks that big. And I always respected that he actually had to sign 3 separate checks because the company was owned by Experian, a bigger company. So he had to sign 3 separate checks to give me this 25,000, but he did give it to me. And I effectively used that to start my own advertising company. And I started an advertising company, and my idea was, so this was in 2001. So I started literally 11 days before the World Trade Center happened, and the market was very bad at that time. It was like the .com crash. But what that meant was there was a lot of spare advertising inventory that people weren't buying, because even though some of these websites had been overvalued, they still had a lot of people visiting them. So there was an opportunity effectively to go to these websites and say, I will bring you advertisers, but I'll only pay you based on the results. So you don't get like cost per thousand normal advertising fee. You get an amount for the results. And I've got all these really big clients who want to do this with you. That wasn't really true. I didn't have any big clients. And then I would go to the clients at the same time and say, I will bring you, I will, allow you to advertise on the internet, this scary thing, and you'll only need to pay me based on the results. And I've got all these websites lined up that will allow you to do this, which I didn't have because I was doing both conversations at the same time. So I was sort of going to the advertisers saying I had the inventory, and the inventory owners saying I had the advertisers. And I didn't really have either, but I was trying to get one at the same time. And it did kind of work out. I signed up some clients, and I signed up some publishers because it was sort of like a market opportunity. The one big client I had was owned by Universal Music, and it was a thing called Britannia Music. I'm really going to age myself here because it was about collecting DVDs. So at the time, everyone was collecting DVDs. Yes, I'm that old. And so it was like a popular thing to do. So this was a DVD club where you signed up for a DVD, usually for very cheap, or a few DVDs you got very cheap, and then you got more for free, basically, or like on a sort of subscription basis. So you paid each month, whatever it was, $20 a month to get a different DVD. So it's a bit like kind of Netflix before Netflix came out. I started doing that and started running the ads on these like websites where I'd agreed to just pay them for the results, and was not getting any traction at all. So I was getting like a few sales, I think, a week. So I was like, oh dear, this is not good, because now I'm not going to make any money. But then I tried to sign up for the DVD club myself. And, I was a fairly like savvy young person, so I sort of knew how to use the internet. It was basically impossible to sign up, which sounds crazy now, but when websites first came out, everyone had these terrible websites that took like half an hour to load, and they were just a joke. So I went to the company and said, why don't you redesign this website? Because it's terrible. No one can actually sign up. You're not going to get any customers doing this. And they're like, no, we don't really believe in the internet. We're not going to do that. So I was like, okay, well, I will redesign your website, and I will pay for it. But then I own your website. So they said, okay, sure. So then I had to work out how to not only design a website, but also code a website. And the website had to sort of connect to their back-end system, which was like some mainframe system. So at the time, I was just like figuring things out. But looking back, if it was like kind of a crazy thing to try and work out. But I basically made a website, I think in about 4 or 5 weeks, which actually connected into their back-end system. But I made it really, really simple and easy to use. So it just said like free DVD, sign up here, you filled in your details and you were done, kind of thing.
Right.
And that really started working very well once I switched the ads back on with that new, very simple design. And that's sort of how the business got going. We did £1.7 million of revenue in that first year. And I think I made £340,000 of profit in that first year. Then at the end of that year, I lost that big client because they thought they could do it better with another bigger company. So I lost 70% of my revenue. I found another advertising platform to sell, which helped us recover from that. And we actually did more revenue in the second year than the first year. I also started working with a lot of people who I still work with now, including like one of our team from Artemis, who runs our client services team, Dean. He was, I think, my third person employee at TBG. And I had a lot of ups and downs along the way. One of the things that happened was we were the first UK advertiser on Google. So Sergey Brin, who's one of the founders of Google, came out and met with us. And I didn't really know who he was, but really didn't take advantage of that opportunity because didn't have a clue. It was like 24 by that time. So then about 7 years later, the business had done quite well, like grown, probably about 35 people by that point, had some ups and downs along the way. But when I first started working with Facebook, this was when they had about 30 million users, I think in 2008, or maybe 2007. Because I'd missed the opportunity with Google, I didn't want to miss it again. So I really went all in on Facebook when it was very small. I never knew it would become as big as it did, but thought it could become that big quite early. So went all in on Facebook and really focused the business around Facebook. They had a program where you could build some technology, and volunteered to be one of the first companies to do that. Had a team of people building out, trying to build technology which connected into Facebook. And the business grew from about $10 million of media billings, which was like sort of revenue, to about $100 million in media billings because Facebook were telling everyone to work with us. So we sort of took advantage of that, partnered with them. And that's also when Kate Lavender, who's now the CEO of Artemis, came to be the COO of that company and was like the grown up in the room, actually making things work properly rather than like my sort of like shabby way of doing it, I suppose. So business was very successful. I also met my wife around that time, so I was having quite a good time. But I would say I got to this point where, I felt like I was kind of awesome because I, found Facebook before anyone else and now I was making all this money and stuff. Didn't treat Facebook very respectfully, as in like my technology that I was building out really wasn't very good, and had a bit of a like relaxed attitude with information that they would give us. They were very concerned about anything that was confidential, and not that I would necessarily be, shouting it about, but it was like the culture of the business basically meant that sharing information was okay, kind of thing. So one of my team shared some information with a client that they shouldn't have. And at the same time, our technology sucked and Facebook knew that. And we were sort of pretending it was better than it was. So then Facebook removed what was called a PMD badge, which was like our certification. And effectively meant that they started telling all of these clients who they told to work with us to stop working with us. So our revenue immediately dropped by about 30%. And I went into this like complete panic meltdown, where I was like turned into a complete control freak, but in a very crazy way when I look back at it. So sort of like this like arrogant thinking I'm awesome thing had created this problem. And then I compounded the problem by not staying calm when it was happening, going into this panic mode, which resulted in me like going into this command and control thing where I was like interfering in everyone's jobs, including Kate's, which actually led Kate to leave the business because, I was annoying her that much, which was, her and other talent basically left at the same time. So I did eventually come out of that like panic mode and sort of recover. The business focused on our existing clients. Some of our clients didn't actually like Facebook. So I sort of focused on those clients because obviously Facebook was like not a fan of ours anymore. And like, so I focused on the clients that were a little bit suspicious of Facebook anyway. And got the business back to being at least sort of stable. And then identified a company that I thought would be good as an acquirer. I'd been doing it for 13 years by that point, been through all these ups and downs and sort of wanted to just do something else. So I identified this company that would be a good acquirer, made friends with their CEO, offered to do some things that would help their business without asking for any money for it. He asked me to move into their offices. They had this kind of quite boring culture. And when I think we got there in New York, we were quite fun. We would go out and like, this was before I became old and boring. So we like improved the culture of their business. And then he started making offers to buy the company. So I think the first offer was like $6 million. And I was just like, nah, I don't, the business was making like $1.5 million or something a year. And I was just like, 6 million, don't want to do it. And they would go up to like 8 million. And I wouldn't count a bid. I was not counter bidding at all. I was just like, no. Eventually it got to like, the bid got to 19 million and it wasn't all cash. It was like some cash, some stock, some earn out. Like, so most deals are like that. But I thought the structure of the deal was good. I really liked the company. I actually really like working for him. You know, he's a bit crazy, but he's a genius. So I thought I could learn a lot from him. So I agreed to be acquired by Sprinkler, the company is called. And then I stayed on there and worked there for 2.5 years. Was like, I would say, probably one of the star players in the business, grew this division from zero. In my last quarter there, we did $10 million of bookings, which was like, so it's like very significant growth in that 2.5 year period. So eventually resigned from the company after I'd completed my earn out. So I'd been there about 2.5 years when I sort of completed that chapter. I was actually a little bit sad after that because I really wanted to see Sprinkler through for a bit longer, and I felt like there was a lot more upside, and I sort of was a bit upset with how it happened at the end. But I took a year off, so it was almost like breaking up from a relationship. I felt quite sad, and I just gave myself a bit of a break from work. Fortunately, I had made a bit of money, so I had that luxury, I suppose.
What was it, coming from a sales background, coming from an ads background, a media background, what was it that really drew you to beauty and wellness after your sort of year sabbatical outside of work?
It's a good question. So I generally just have this philosophy where I just say yes to doing things, so I started this cryotherapy shop because I tried cryotherapy and I liked it. And it didn't really make any sense because I don't know anything about retail. I don't know anything about wellness and health and beauty, but I was like, well, there's no nice cryotherapy shop in New York, so I'm going to open one. I suppose it's just like saying yes to that. And that shop in the end didn't work out. It was a really nice place, but didn't end up making money. But obviously, as a result of that, that turned into Artemis, which is a successful business. So, I think I've just had this philosophy of saying yes is one thing. So it wasn't like I had this big plan to get into health and beauty. It was just like I'd said yes to a few things in a row and it led there. I did like it that it's a growing business. And, I think partly because of social media, like people are way more conscious of how their face and body looks because they're having to like post pictures of themselves to their friends. I also do think like how you look and how you feel makes a big difference to how you successful you can be in life. A lot of me and my family have struggled with our weight for a lot of our just genetically. I think we put on weight easily, and it can make you feel quite uncomfortable. Like I know when I've lost weight, I just feel much better like than when you're carrying too many pounds, which is difficult to do when you're genetically programmed to put on weight. So I just think like I do believe that being focused on health and beauty is a good thing, makes you feel better about yourself, and that can help you achieve more. And I don't know, it was just I found it a nice industry. I actually find the people really passionate about it. People are really passionate about the area. And I'd at Sprinkler, I'd spent a lot of time hanging around with a lot of engineers who are great, amazing, intelligent people. But it was just a different type of person, passionate about what they were doing, but in a different way. So yeah, I don't think there was any big master plan. I mean, the other thing I did think about when I started the businesses is that I felt the competition in technology at Sprinkler. We were competing against Google and Facebook and like really amazing companies. It's really hard to compete against those companies. From the people I'd met in, especially like the distribution of devices, for example, I didn't feel the competition was super strong. And I just felt maybe it would be easier to create a great business where the competition isn't like some of the best companies in the world. But I'm generally, I'm looking for an area that I think is interesting, I think is growing. I think there's some sort of unique opportunity, which some of the products that we have, I think are great. So, but I wouldn't say there was some grand plan. I mean, I probably could have made more money if I'd stayed in advertising. I had a lot of relationships. I knew like a lot about it. But I also just, I wanted life to be an adventure, so I wanted to try and do different things and prove like that I could, run businesses in different areas. And that was a higher priority to me than like making as much money as I could, sort of thing. So I don't know if that was too long a story, but
No, it was great. I mean, I have a lot of questions to kind of piggyback off of, which is fantastic. The first question that I have is around sort of, your early experience, and you talk about this kind of almost bullish arrogance and that type of a mindset. Is that something that did you ever feel a fear of failing in those moments, or were you just so confident in your ability to just keep getting these opportunities, keep getting through these different hurdles? That's the one thing I'm curious about, if it came to a turning point for you.
yeah, so I do feel, I don't know where it came from, but I feel like I was naturally just a very arrogant person. I've actually become, I think, more humble over time, partly because I've been like kicked on my ass quite a few times,
Mhm.
especially when I've been like thinking I'm awesome. But yeah, if you'd have met me when I'm 17, 18, like I'm a handful. I mean, it's like, I mean, there's a band back then called Oasis, and they had
Yes.
this front man called Liam Gallagher who was a complete idiot, and I literally modeled myself on him. So, I think I was naturally smart. My mum had really pushed me to have a good education, and I'd got
Mhm.
good grades at school until I left. So yeah, I just had a lot of natural confidence. Partly because of my, I think, success in school, and like I think it's just a natural thing.
Yeah, no, and I think it really shines through and shows in the experience in terms of having the confidence to say to a boss at 17, you can pay me 25% commission, and take away my salary. I think that takes a lot of guts and a lot of confidence in your own abilities at such a young age to be able to do that. So when would you say was that turning point for you? I know you had mentioned that you had this moment of panic all of a sudden when, things kind of changed at TBG. What would you say changed for you in that moment, and how would you say that you have related to failure since then?
I think you can be a very confident person and also be, certain things effectively trigger you.
Hmm.
Um, so I feel like when Facebook said that we were, took away this badge and basically were telling clients that we were not a good company, it sort of it was some fairly deep trigger in me, which basically turned me, triggered like a panic mode.
Mm.
Um, so I think when I was growing up, one of the ways my mum used to motivate me was to sort of say that she always wanted me to be number one in my thing. So I remember being number two in the maths test, and she saying it wasn't good enough, and me being very upset. And I also remember her saying like that my brother was smarter than me, and he is actually a very smart guy. But I sort of always remember those things. So I think anything where I'm being told that I'm not clever enough sort of triggers me, and then can
Mm.
create this like panic emotional response, which is
Right.
definitely like not productive. So
Mm.
even though I have this like, well, I think I had like arrogance, I think I've brought it down to more like confidence as I've got older, which I think is a nicer thing than arrogance. But I think I could still get triggered by things that happened because they're connecting to something in my brain which is saying like I'm stupid or I'm not good enough. So
Right.
that's like, even though you can be a confident, successful, good person, something happens to you can still trigger you in a way, and then like it's like your emotional, like, I don't know, subconscious brain takes over, but not in a good way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the subconscious mind, it comprises 95 to 97% of our mind. So we're only consciously operating with 3 to 5% of our mind at any given waking moment, which is a little bit terrifying, actually, if you think about that data
Yeah,
point. If
definitely.
that data point doesn't blow your mind, it's wild. But in terms of, yeah, to your point of this kind of difference between arrogance and confidence, what in your view is the difference between the two, and how did you kind of reel that back to be something that is more productive? Because confidence is obviously an incredibly valuable trait and asset to have to any entrepreneur, any person, anyone who's trying to do something in the world and get people behind them.
Yeah, I just think arrogance, I don't know, I'd have to look up the actual definition, but the way I think of it is arrogance is a bit more not based on actual reality. Whereas confidence, I feel like, is really based on like what is really true.
Mm-hmm.
So I think confidence is a really good trait, and arrogance is not always a good trait. I think in my case, I'd left home, I was by myself, I was trying to make something of myself. Like I almost needed the arrogance, like it was like my armor, right, to get me through those difficult early years when I was trying to make something of myself. So I don't think it was like a bad thing that I had it, but just the way that I would treat. I think I generally was respectful to people at work, but like not always treating people with like utmost respect and stuff, because like, I literally thought I was awesome. And I still think I still have that like inbuilt confidence in myself.
Yeah.
But I just have more of a tinge of humility, partly because I have been through some things where I've really messed things up.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, I just think confidence is a really good thing, especially like as I think about my kids now, helping them feel confident and working on the areas that they're strong in, so then they can feel confident about doing those things. I think it's like amazing, can help you achieve so much more if you can, help your kids feel confident. But I think arrogance is a bit more dangerous, because you need to have this like, tinge of humility that goes with it, and just realizing that you don't know everything.
Yeah, I think the humility too is really important, because it also allows you to step out of that panic mode that can come in those moments of failure, and actually take a look at what the lesson is behind the failure, and, kind of have that sense of self-awareness to be able to say, okay, this is where I might have misstepped. This is where I might have had a blind spot, and actually be able to then action differently and move differently afterwards. And kind of to that point, what would you say have been kind of your most monumental failures, for better word, that you've experienced within business that have really been turning points for you, and how have you transmuted them from something that has felt immensely, sort of panic stricken and painful and, potentially jarring, obviously losing huge percentages of revenue, or, as you have talked about, Facebook removing this badge and kind of changing the way that your business was operating as a result. Were you able to transmute those into lessons, as opposed to seeing them as these failures?
I mean, I think my biggest business failure is the Facebook, relationship that I didn't manage well. Because, in dollar terms, I had an offer for the business at $45 million, and I ended up selling it for 19 million quite a few years later. So, you can actually put a real numeric value on that failure. Like, it cost me $25 million. So that is definitely the biggest failure, I think, especially as I can really measure it. And the reason that happened was because arrogance. I kind of, like to your earlier question, my arrogance led me just to thinking I'm awesome, and not thinking I don't really need to manage the relationship, because they can't live without me, which is just like never true. And then I compounded the problem with this kind of panic. So I think what I have learned from that is, if you've got in relationships within your business which are really important. So in the case of Artemis, for example, the supply chain is really important, who we're buying from. Because if we want to make all our partners and customers happy, but if we lose one customer, we've got 2,000 customers, right? So it's not a killer. It's something we need to look at, but it's not a killer. If we lose like our main, suppliers of our devices, then we can't operate. So just being really thoughtful about who is important and where the relationship needs to be managed and what their objectives are, making sure you're respectful of those. I think I learned from the experience with the poor management of our Facebook relationship. And then in terms of what I did after that happened, as in like went into a meltdown panic attack, it's just when there is issues is to stay calm. Mm-hmm. And try and rationally work out what is the problem and what are the next steps that you can take, and then take one step at a time. And the way that I try to do that is I do a lot more like work on like meditation, and like I have therapy every week, and like to try and like being much more aware of my own emotions. But I also set intentions for myself at the start of each day, which is generally around something to do with the fact that every day there's going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. And my job is to solve problems, rather than this framing of when this happens, I'll be happy. Instead, I sort of try and frame my life with like, there's always problems. Every day there's another problem, right? Even Jeff
Yeah.
Bezos and Elon Musk, they have problems every day too, right? So
Right.
everyone, however well successful you are or not, you're going to have a problem to deal with. So you just have to figure out what the problems are, do your best to solve the problems, and focus on what you can do to solve the problems rather than like catastrophizing, thinking what's going to happen in the future, thinking about what you could have changed in the past. Those things you can't do anything about. Just kind of like focus on what you're doing now. Is this the right task that I should be doing? Do it as well as you can. Just focus on that task, complete the next task. So I think it's really being more prepared about what could happen, what relationships are important, and then when things do happen, which they always do, just being a lot more calm and thoughtful about how you're dealing with them rather than going into like a frenzied panic attack.
Right.
Which sounds really obvious, like when now I say that, obviously panicking is never good, but I suppose that's a lesson that I had to learn.
Well, and I think that's where the mindfulness component comes in. I think that sometimes, often for people, the panic becomes an automatic response. I mean, it's a physiological response. It's a response that also comes into the mind. It comes into play very quickly. And a lot of people are not aware of the particular situations or issues that they might be dealing with on a day-to-day basis that might be triggering that for them. So it's that level of awareness to be able to create the space. And then I think also to your point, shifting from that internal or rather external locus of control of things are happening to me and looking at problems that are happening on a day-to-day basis to an internal locus of control of, I have an ability to control how I'm responding, how I'm reacting, and in turn, kind of developing that solution-based mindset is so impactful, because otherwise, as you said, you're going to move through every day just feeling exhausted at the end of the day that you're just been putting out fires. And, it's a lot more empowering to look at problems as, things that you're able to solve and fix to the best of your ability, at least every day. And I think it really changes the dynamic. It changes how we relate to our work as well. And hopefully makes it a little bit more fulfilling. I would ask for someone who is listening that might be a little bit more stricken by failure or feel a little bit more defeated by failure or struggle to kind of derive the lesson out of it. What is a piece of advice that you would give them? How do you kind of manage that when it's happening in the moment and it's very painful?
It's a good question. I do suffer from anxiety, so it's not like I do get like periods where I feel like really terrible if something's happening that I'm not liking or I'm not in control of. So I do understand it. I mean, I suppose the first thing I would probably do is just when you're having a problem, be aware that the problem often expresses itself in your body. So your body will often be very tense. So the first thing I would do is go through every muscle in my body and tense and release every muscle. Just so like I'm trying to relax my body, because often the stress you're feeling in your mind is represented in your body. So I would probably do that a few times. Mm-hmm. Then I would do something that I call, my therapist, I suppose, calls root in the reality, which is I write a journal, which is like, what's really happening here? This is what's really happening. A lot of the time you're catastrophizing something and it's not really actually, you can worry about a lot of things. Most of them never happen. I think that's a quote from Mark Twain or something like that.
Right.
So it's like, write down what's actually happening, what the problems are, what your objectives are, sort of root in the reality of what's happening and what the plan is, and like, what is the worst case scenario. And, most of the time, obviously, unless it's a health issue, which is like a different level of problem, most of the time, the worst case scenario is not that bad. There's some way of dealing with the problem. Not always. Sometimes you'll see some people have real major compounded issues, and that's like different. I don't think I've really had the experience of dealing with like that level of issue. But, so it's to write down what you're doing, to get some emotional support. So, talk if you've got a partner or you've got a best friend or you've got, a relative or someone you can talk to about what's happening in your life in a bit of detail. I have a therapy session once a week. I don't really need it every week, but I just do it anyway, because it's like, then it means I'm talking. There's an hour each week where I'm just talking about my stuff, right? Because we've got 4 kids. So even if my wife's great, but like sometimes she's busy with the kids, because they're, crazy. So it's like, I have an hour. Yeah. I have an hour where I'm talking to somebody about my issues, but it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a relative or a friend or somebody else, who's supportive. And then try and have a plan, which usually involves, coming up with step by step, thinking about what your objective is and then what steps you need to take to achieve your objective. And then just start doing the steps, like action really is the solution, right? So it's like, just do the next thing on the list and then do the next thing on the list. And then don't worry about all the other things you have to do. Just hit off the next thing on the list. And when you just do that, it's amazing what you can achieve if you just slowly, chip away. So I think that is generally how I deal with things which trigger me in some way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that those pieces of advice are great and just really tangible and really apply across not only obviously when we're feeling triggered in business, but obviously in our personal lives as well, when we're feeling triggered, to go through those action steps and also to really take a look at, using and transmuting that emotion or whatever emotion it is that we're feeling, whether it's anger that's coming up, whether it is fear, there's always some kind of a primal emotion underneath whatever it is that we're experiencing. So being able to then channel that into something like action. So,
I think that's also a good point. Like, so sometimes what happens is I'll go through that process and the anxiety will not go away. And so it kind of feels sticky. And normally in that case, what I've found is that it's triggering something else in my brain, which is actually nothing to do with the current issue. It's something to do with some trauma I had when I was younger.
Right.
So in my case, and this is now going to get a little bit weird, but you can always edit it out. In my case, I have this thing where there's two things. Number one, my mum said, that my brother was smarter than me, and she wasn't trying to be mean. She was just trying to motivate me, but that's just somehow that got stuck in my head. So I have this trigger about feeling stupid. And also my dad used to hit me when I was a kid for discipline, not like being beaten up, but I'd have to wait for him to come home and hit me, and I would feel very afraid for quite a few hours. So I've noticed that if a female calls me stupid, even if they don't mean to, they're just like, that can trigger me quite badly. And if a male threatens me in some way, that can trigger me quite badly. And even when I go through these rational steps, it doesn't help. I still feel terrible. I meditate each day. And I think over time, I don't think meditation, like I read somewhere, it's like trying to build muscle by lifting a 1 pound weight, which is kind of true. It's not like you can't do it for one day and think you'll be better, but over time, it just creates a little bit of space between the emotion and the reaction, and you being aware of that emotion. And if you can have that little bit of awareness, then it can stop you going into these kind of like panic modes, because you're aware, oh, this is actually triggering me, and I need to actually take a minute.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things about business in general. There's hardly anything that you have to make a decision on immediately. So it's always like giving yourself that little bit of extra, like I often sleep on stuff, or like say, I'll think about that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Just giving yourself a little bit of time to sort of process the emotions. I don't know if this is true, but I sort of find it, especially with men, like I think women generally are emotionally a bit smarter, so they can sort of process emotions quicker, which is often why they're better at arguing. During arguments, you feel like you're losing if you're a man, because like your emotions are like just not processing as quickly. I think, and I'm sure there's some men who are very, very advanced, but like I think especially men is like just giving yourself a minute to allow your emotions to process, because some of them are. Some emotions is real information that you're getting from your subconscious, and some of it is like noise that you're getting from these like past traumas. And so it's like allowing yourself to figure out which is which, and then that can be extra power to help you make good decisions, along with the sort of more logical side of like writing down what the problem is and that kind of stuff.
Right. It's almost like pouring pasta through a strainer. It's like you need to discern what is the useful emotion, what's giving you information that's relevant to the situation that you're dealing with versus what is information that's coming from, a variety of different stimuli from the past, from, an annoyance when you were driving in your car earlier today, from an annoying interaction with a coworker, whatever it might be. These things are all kind of conglomerate and get stored in the same way, and then all of a sudden we're lashing out at our partners for something that is not really about them, or them something that's not really about us. And I think that that's something actually you touched on a little bit earlier that I did want to highlight too, is this idea of remembering that in these situations that it's very often not personal, particularly when it's in business. Obviously, there are situations that can feel very personal, and some can actually be quite personal. But generally speaking, I would say, and you can disagree and debate this if you don't agree, but I would say generally in business, and kind of on our way up in business especially, these failures, these lessons, it's not personal. And, kind of distancing the self from that is really important.
Yeah, I think that
well.
is a great point. Like if you think about some of the most successful business people, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, Elon Musk, they're either, they're, I wouldn't say they're, I think Elon Musk has openly said he's like on the spectrum somewhere, as in like he has maybe Asperger's syndrome or something like that, which obviously seems like it's been challenging for him to have personal relationships. But from a business point of view, obviously he's an amazing business person because he's able to make these passionate decisions, which are about the facts he has in hand, rather than, as you say, to the people taking it more personally. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of like the top business people in the world are a little bit like that emotionally, or just appear like that. I don't know them personally, but that's how they appear when you see them in interviews and stuff. So I definitely think trying to be aware that things in business are not generally a personal thing, and it's about making the right decision. And it's like, I think also when you have an awareness of these triggers for yourself, you can also start to be aware of like the other person might be getting triggered, right? And maybe they haven't done the work, and so they don't even know they're triggered, but they are triggered, and you can still have some empathy for them and sort of allow them to like deal with their stuff a little bit, rather than like reacting to it. And it's just like, I think it is good advice to try and be as dispassionate as possible in most business decisions. Obviously there's people involved and staff and clients, and you do need to be like empathetic of specific situations depending on what's happening with the person. But generally most decisions, it's best to be like fairly cold, and just looking at the data and the facts and not taking things personally, as you said.
Yeah, trying to be as objective as possible within that. And I think, to your point, taking that time and that space to just discharge the emotionality that comes with that immediate reactivity, and taking the space, the thing that I always kind of try to do is to respond versus react. I think reacting it's really easy. It's the impulse that comes for all of us, and that's what things like meditation do. They just create that little bit more space where we're able to just take a minute and take a beat and just remember that, we don't have to react. To your point, there are very rarely decisions that we have to make within the context of business that have to be made in the snap of a finger in an instant. There's very few things that, you wouldn't have the opportunity to sleep on. And I think that that's also something to empower entrepreneurs and any professional at all to always feel free to ask for the ability to sleep on something if it is a decision that's going to have a lot of impact, for whatever it is that they're working on or looking to achieve, especially in relationships. Trying to build a relationship, sign a deal, any agreements. It's really good to just take that space to make sure that it's the right thing, and I think that can kind of avoid a lot of unnecessary potential lessons, shall we say. I know we've said the word failure a lot in this episode. This episode is really meant to be discussing failures as lessons more than anything. I don't really believe personally in failure as such. I really do think that everything is a lesson. We can learn from everything. I think the only failure comes when we refuse to take a look at and take accountability for our part in that as well. And I think that that's something that I would also raise for any professional or entrepreneur in any space, is that when you experience a failure or you experience something that doesn't go your way, it's just to, without self-criticism or perfectionism or judgment, just objectively, to your point, Simon, just being able to take a step back and saying, okay, what part did I play here? Where can I take accountability for maybe something that I could have done differently? And I think that the story that you told about TBG and kind of having created this culture that was very loose with information, I think that that's the perfect example of taking accountability and learning a lesson from that, because it's saying, what, I kind of created this culture where information was loose, and that is what ended up leading to this team member of mine sharing this information. And I think that, it's really important to do that, because a lot of other people might have had the inclination to use that person as a scapegoat and to blame it on them. And I would see that as not taking accountability for that lesson. So I don't know if
I think there's this book, there's this Jocko book called, I think it's Extreme Ownership. And basically the summary, it's one of those books where it's like, you could summarize it in a few words, but it's basically like everything is your fault. So
in so many words,
everything is your fault. Start by thinking, instead of being like, oh, why did that person do this and mess up my business? Right. Like, start by thinking, what is the environment I've created? What were the expectations I created? What did I do that made this happen? It's just a much better framing, I think, and I try and, sometimes I forget that, but like I try and remind myself of that. Like, if there's a problem in anything that I'm doing, how have I set up the incentives wrong?
Yeah.
Because, people aren't generally acting, out of like some sort of malice or something. They make a mistake because they're incentivized in a certain way. And that's generally the fault of the management of the company, so right. I think that's one thing. And then I think what you're saying also is good. It's like, almost, I think failure maybe is too extreme a word, because failure implies like there's no recovery. And exactly. when you sent me the notes before the podcast today, like to say like, oh, these are some things I want to talk about. Initially, I was actually struggling to think of failure, because I think in my mind they're not failures. They are I've made very large mistakes, which I've then had to like correct and hopefully learn from, but they're not failures because I've got up again. So it's just like, I actually don't, even though some of them cost me a lot of money, I actually don't even regret them. It's like, there are things that happened and I wish I'd done better, but I learned from it for the next time. So it's just, I think a lot of it is like how you frame things, in your own brain, kind of what I was saying earlier about intentions. It's like, there's problems. Everyone has problems every day. And our job is to solve problems. Yeah. And so solve as many problems as you can that day. And then the next day, solve some more problems. That's basically what you do. If you're involved in business, that's what you're doing.
100%. And I think, to your point, even our concept of failure, how we perceive failure, ultimately guides how we behave and how we communicate and how we make decisions. And I think that one thing I also want to ask you about is your thought on this kind of pursuit of perfectionism that can really be, I think, a plague in business and entrepreneurship, certainly. Obviously in the beauty and wellness space, definitely. There is this constant pursuit of perfection. But I think that there is this fear of failure or fear of making mistakes or fear of fumbling in front of other people, of being seen in that way as imperfect. What are your thoughts on that, and kind of what would you share on that to people?
Yeah, I think it's quite a personal thing, because actually, as I said, I have anxiety, but it's a different type of anxiety. My oldest daughter has also anxiety, but has like this perfectionism based anxiety, where it's like, if she's made one small mistake on something, she's extremely upset, if she spent a lot of time on it. And like, so I've been trying to help her deal with that. The first thing is reframing perfectionism anyway. It's like, there is no such thing as perfect. Yeah. There's always mistakes, there's always errors in any piece of work. And actually that's what you learn from, like yes. When you look back on your life, or like your business life, or anything part of your life, you don't always, the stories you tell are actually the hard times you went through together and what you learned from they're the good stories. So
Right.
the first thing is there is no such thing as perfect. The second thing is you have to make mistakes in order to learn.
Mm.
And so they're actually a positive thing. If there wasn't no mistakes, it would actually be really hard to learn.
There would be no success.
Yeah, maybe not even possible to learn, and then no success, as you say. I think this whole like social anxiety again, which I don't personally have that type of anxiety, but some of my family members do, is like just to remember that most people are only worried about themselves and are
Mm.
not even really paying attention to what you're doing. Um,
That's a really good point.
because they're like in their own head bugging out about whatever their issue is today.
Right.
So being really worried about what other people think of you doesn't really make a lot of sense, even though I understand why we do it, because probably,
Right.
as we've come from being, living in the fields and stuff. If we were not socially accepted, it could
Mm.
mean that we would actually be, thrown out of a tribe and, end up dying. So genetically we are programmed to want to be, accepted by our community. So I
Right.
understand the like real deep genetic, like underlying reason why you'd want to feel that strongly. But, in the modern day world, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, I suppose it's like reframing it a little bit, trying to break it down logically. That's, I suppose, how I would go at it, because I'm sort of quite a logical person like that. I don't know, like, how would you, if you were advising a friend who's a perfectionist, how would you advise them? Because I can then use that when I'm talking to my daughter, actually. I need some help. I
Yeah,
need some
I
help.
mean, as a recovering perfectionist, I can speak from experience. No, I think that, to your point, the recognition that we're kind of all in the same boat with it, right? Like we're all thinking that that everyone else is thinking things about us that they're not, And so then if you just all of a sudden you think about everyone in the world thinking about what other people are thinking, and then everybody's just thinking about, how they're perceived and all of these things, but we're all consumed with that. So nobody's actually thinking about what you're doing in that way. Nobody's actually judging what you're doing in that way. But I also think that what I've really realized, and something actually that I think it must have had to have been you, is this like done not perfect mantra, to just really keep that in mind, because perfectionism is just such an inhibitor to action, and it can be so paralyzing, and it then just is the Ouroboros that starts to eat itself, where
And
you've
what is it?
got.
Yeah. So when you're not, I think in the past when I've said to you like ship the work, even if it's not
Yeah.
like, what is the feeling that why is it that what stops you from shipping it? Whenever you send me work, it's always amazing, right? So I'm sure it's because you're a perfectionist partly. So it is a good thing, but like, I'm just trying to understand partly, for me to help my daughter with it. Like, what is the reason, what is going on in your head about why you don't want to ship it? Like,
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there's a few things at play. I think part of it is definitely control, perfection. I literally have sitting next to me my Kindle, and the book on the cover of the Kindle right now is The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control. And so there's a control element to perfectionism. You want to control the outcome. You want to control the perception. You want to control the quality. But I also think that perfectionism, you never feel like it's done. You never feel like it's perfect. You never feel like you've gotten it, you've nailed it, you've gotten there. But part of that is because perfection it's not attainable. It doesn't exist, to your point. It's not something that can ever be achieved, and so it's the dog that's chasing its tail constantly. So I think that the things that have helped me the most, because I really actually relate to what you shared about your daughter, feeling like when she makes this one small mistake that the whole thing is a mess, and she should throw it out or give it up. I used to be that way actually with my meditation practice, where if I missed one day, even if I had a 90-day streak, I would just say, bin it. I would chuck it out, because I wasn't perfect anymore. I hadn't, kept that perfect streak and kept that perfect discipline. And something that one of my mentors shared with me that has really, really helped with that is, if you miss one day, or if one thing, if something is not perfect, or it's not, 100%, you just come back the next day and you act like it's day 100. even if it's day one. You act like it's day 100, and you just come with that mindset. And it's a really powerful tool to be able to just sit back down. You just, no guilt, no shame. Those emotions are not really helpful in this kind of a situation. So you just sit back down and you act like it's day 100, and
Yeah.
you just go on with it. And I think that that is so helpful for people that struggle with that type of a mindset, because it just gets you out of this idea that every single thing needs to be perfect in order for it to be acceptable. And I think also, to your point of, this idea of where this is rooted or where it's coming from, there's this, obviously evolutionarily we're predisposed to want to be accepted, to be kind of within this community of humans, to be protected, to be within the clan of people. But there are also, core wounds that are surrounded by that. So there's the I'm not good enough, there's, the I'm not worthy, there's these different things that can come from our childhood experiences that then also inform this perfectionism as well. And, for some people it's control, for some people it is, needing to prove value or to prove worth. And, what I will say is that when you are able to just loosen the grips on it, it offers you so much more space in your life and in your mind. And it offers you so much more freedom to deliver more work that is actually of better quality, because you're actually able to just loosen the grip of your mind on those types of things.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think you've made a lot of progress there. So it's great. And it's also, I think, useful for me to understand things like perfectionism, which I don't personally have, or like one of our team members had like this imposter syndrome, which again, I don't suffer from, but like to actually, investigate those things, because then it can help you when you're working with people to understand them a bit better. And obviously help them do their best work, basically.
Definitely. And with imposter syndrome, I talked about it a little bit on the last episode of the podcast, but that's definitely something I can also relate to. It's something I think that a lot of professionals, but also a lot of entrepreneurs likely struggle with. It is so pervasive. It is so irrational. So I think that it is something that's so interesting to think of in the context of your story about your background, because you had the opposite of imposter syndrome, where you were you were selling things that didn't exist at a certain point.
Well, I think the interesting thing about imposter syndrome is when I look, the best thing I found on it was like it said that it's usually almost always very talented people have it. It's quite a good positive way of talking to someone, I think, who's got it, because it's like you are talented, otherwise you wouldn't actually have imposter syndrome. Like,
right, you just you.
I suppose I had almost the opposite problem of being like overconfident rather than like, so but it's just interesting. Everyone has their own like different issues that they have to try and deal with in order to like fulfill their potential, basically. So it's just helping them work through those different things.
Yeah. And I think that that's where, the awareness comes in, and where that's so important to really explore that. And, I think that it's where that recontextualization of failure comes in, and we're looking at things as lessons rather than failures is so important, because I think failure is a word that to me represents, a dead end or a concrete block or a door closed, whereas a lesson is something that opens a door. It changes the direction. It pivots you in a way that, you're moving forward from that. You're not moving, backwards or just blocked. So before we sign off, I just wanted to ask you a question that I'm going to be asking to all of our guests, which is, what does beauty mean to you personally?
Okay. I think that's a very interesting question. I suppose the sometimes beauty, I think, is like construed negatively, almost like it's like superficial, or I don't know, the pursuit of something which doesn't have a lot of depth to it. I don't actually agree with that, though. I think to me, like, I think about a flower. A flower is very beautiful, but it's also functional. It's beautiful, and it attracts the bees, and the bees spread its pollen, and that makes more of those particular, beautiful flowers. And the same thing when I use certain products, so I like Apple products, for example. I just feel like they're designed in a way that is enjoyable, and it's partly because I don't know, they just feel more beautiful to use. The software and the hardware and everything just feels more like beautiful the way they've been designed, and very thoughtfully, all the little details thought about. So I suppose it is the pursuit of things being more organized and ordered and nicer, and as much as you can be in terms of physical beauty. But yeah, I think it's like, I can't really explain it exactly, but it's like, I suppose it's like the pursuit of order, and it's like functionally, there is function to it. I think with people, it's like, my personal, case where I've been, maybe sometimes I'm a bit, if I put on weight, I just don't feel as nice in my own skin. And when I've lost weight, I just feel a bit better. That's my own personal perception. So not saying that you can't be like all different shapes and sizes and beautiful. It's more about how you perceive yourself. So I just think there's function in it. And I think like, it's the same as like trying to be as intelligent as you can be, or trying to be as fit as you can be, or like, it's just, I feel like the pursuit of excellence and trying to be better is good. And doesn't mean that, you may not ever be the most clever or the most rich or the most fit or the most beautiful person in the world, but you can still make the best of what you're given. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but that was like how I think about it.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining for today's episode. We will see you back for a future episode as well. But thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Glow and Tell. Please like, subscribe, comment, and follow anywhere where you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time.